Well, it is another busy weather week across the U.S. with extreme cold to start the week and another winter storm impacting really from the central plains through the mid South into the mid Atlantic. Are we going to see a warm up on the way? What are we looking at for precipitation chances through the end of the month and into the spring? Let's talk about things. Joining us now for our weekly weather update is Eric Snodgrass. Eric, always good to catch up with you, my friend. And no shortage of stuff for us to talk about. Another busy weather week on tap for much of the U.S., my friend.
Yeah, it is. But we're at the tail end of this active time period, and so the pattern is going to go a little bit more boring. But before it does so, we got winter storms warnings that stretch the parts of Missouri, northern parts of Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Kentucky. Remember, just saw tremendous flooding. They're going to freeze that over, put snow down on top of it, and make for an absolutely terrible setup there. And then this gets all the way to North Carolina, Virginia as well. Where it doesn't go is it doesn't go to the northeast, and it doesn't penetrate too far into the south with snow either. But I do have some ice risk in parts of Arkansas, a little bit into Missouri, and then definitely over in North Carolina. I will say this, though. The air that's behind this is some of the coldest that we've seen in a very long time. But I was just looking this morning, Amarillo, Texas. It was just on the front of my mind here. They're going to get down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit tomorrow morning and Wednesday morning. We then expect them by early next week to have highs in the mid 70s. So if you don't like this, just wait. There's much more mild air that's going to come in, and also much drier air. And I'm thinking a lot about those people in parts of Kentucky right now that have been so heavily impacted by the flooding rains that are going on there. Now, something to think about, Jesse. Notice the places I didn't talk about. This isn't in the northern plains. We have snow in the northern plains, but it's not. They're behind on their seasonal averages. There's still drought trapped under the frost line in the ground there. That's fall's drought. So if you look at the Mississippi in Memphis, like it's almost at action stage, right? The river has come up 30 feet at Memphis in the last 3 weeks. St. Louis, which does not include the Ohio River, right? Just includes the Missouri and the upper Mississippi, is 2 feet below low stage. So there's a massive gap when you look at the different basins for the Mississippi, and that's something we have to consider and just keep thinking about going forward.
Well, and looking at this setup, and we've been talking about the drought potential here in some of those areas you just mentioned. I mean, how are things looking as we get, later this month into March, April? I mean, anything we can infer from some of the longer term models when it comes to, you mentioned a bit of a warm up here, a drier pattern. Is there anything that you can track from some of these longer term models right now?
There's been an interesting cadence in the weather patterns that's been about 5 weeks in duration. I link it mainly to the MJO. So what I'm saying here is that, okay, we've settled back into this brutally cold pattern. We've done that, right? This is the third time since the new year that we've dropped off for about 8 days of really cold weather. Then we waffle around warmer, and then it happens again. So if we just look at that cadence, I'm worried that we're going to have another Arctic outbreak in the month of March and another one in early April. So we can't, with the warm up that's coming through, I wouldn't want folks getting too like, all right, let's go. The other part of this pattern that's interesting is that much of the eastern third of the country, so just take the Mississippi River and go east, I think we continue to see that area stay on the wetter side of average, especially the mid-south. What I'm worried about is the new March outlook that just came out from the European model, which tries to paint Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, and Mexico drier. And that's been an area we've been worried about for a while. And it's not as though it's overly generous with the moisture in the northern plains, which means if we do not get into a spring where you and I are talking week in and week out about major severe storms up and down the plains, we're going to have a drought situation building into the plains. I know a lot of folks are very nervous about that. I am personally, just having spoke. I mean, I'm in Kansas City today. We've had a crazy winter here, but I'm just worried about drought getting to this part of the United States quicker rather than more slowly. Spring is going to determine the success of this area in a major, major way.
I should ask you too, real quick. I've been talking with folks about Commodity Classic coming up here in Denver, Colorado, in just a couple of weeks. We're going to be there. Some folks are worried we could see a winter storm while we're there, March 2nd through the 4th. Is there anything in your 2-week outlook right now that maybe we need to be concerned about?
Well, of course there is. I mean, it's Denver in March, right? That is it's I love Commodity Classic, but I'm like, man, take me back to New Orleans, or I don't know. I'm biased toward New Orleans because the food is amazing, and
Yeah.
I love it. But anyway, so there's one thing I'm watching, Jesse, and that is actually on the 2nd and 3rd, like literally the weekend we're going to get there. There is the potential for a low to cut over the Rocky Mountains. Now, it's so far out, I have no details, but it's in the ensembles right now, and I can't ignore it. And it would just happen because we're all there. You know, it's going to happen because we're all there. And so, yes, I do think that we have the risk going into Commodity Classic, of having something like that occur. I'll have more details in the coming weeks.
I was going to say, we'll touch on that next week and maybe the week after as we're getting into Commodity Classic. All right, let's turn our attention to South America. That's another key talking point right now. Central Brazil sounds like some of the wet season showers are maybe getting a little more isolated, trying to allow for some field work to get done. But I'm wondering, what are you seeing on some of the weather models for Brazil right now?
Yeah, so we've shrunk the area that was very dry in northern Argentina, southern Brazil. So there's been better moisture there. Where it's gotten dry is in the eastern side of Brazil. So this would be like Minas Gerais and Bahia. The center west had a nice about 10 to 12 day stretch of drier weather, which is what allowed them really to catch up. I'm talking about Mato Grosso. They caught up on their harvest progress and planting progress. In the week 2 models suggest that region goes back over wetter. So when you look at the weather models on week 2, it is about as ideal of a forecast as you could ask for after you've just harvested one crop and planted another, unless you're in that eastern growing area, which continues to be on the drier side of average. But we don't grow a whole lot the farther east you go, right? I mean, it's mainly in that center west, and southern Brazil region that we keep a close eye on. So it's just another week, Jesse, where I look at all of it and say, if we're looking for some sort of big bullish story, it may not be until we get into March. And I'll tell you what to watch for. Watch for a big subtropical high to move into eastern Brazil. If that takes place, that is the historical precedent against giving kind of some yield robbing drought issues in Brazil for the safrinha crop. Plus, we have to worry about the the monsoon slowing down in April versus May. Those are all still things on the table that we could possibly find ourselves worrying about for Brazil. So it's not done yet. It's just going to be a bigger impact on the corn than it could be on the soybeans.
All right. Anything final you're tracking this week when it comes to the weather, Eric?
The big thing is that La Nina, I think, is past its peak. And I just want to tell folks that all that narrative I just shared with you about the risk in the central U.S. of drought problems, that risk goes way up if we see cold water, not where we have the La Nina, but cold water in the Gulf of Alaska emerging. That would be symptomatic of the atmosphere losing its momentum. And so I just get worried about that. This time of year, I always worry about it this time of year because that would be a major drought signal for summer. And some of the models are teasing at that. So I just think we better watch it carefully, knowing that we're not going into a spring with no drought risk. There is still fall's lingering drought plus the effect of this winter that cannot be ignored. It's not in the Mid-South. It's in the northern plains, parts of the southern plains, even parts of the Canadian prairie that we just need to consider with this. So that's my story.
All right. Folks can stay up to date with weather at agweather.com, ag-wx.com. Eric Snodgrass, always appreciate the time. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks, Jesse.